Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
We're going to talk to Lee Stranahan, and of course, we've talked to him before. He's been a reporter from a wide variety of news outlets, from Breitbart to Huffington Post. You can find him at thepopulist.us, also on Twitter at Stranahan. I know you wanted to talk about what's happening with George Soros and his war on law enforcement in Florida. You got a whole series on that at thepopulist.us.
I think this is especially important, David, because it's police week, and we've already had 2 cops shot and 1 killed this week. This is when we honor police. George Soros is being engaged last year. He spent millions of dollars in local races. And he's had an effect in Florida. A state's attorney he helped elect said she's not going to file the death penalty on any cases, including that of an alleged cop killer. I have it at thepopulist.us. We're going to have more coming on this. This is how Soros doesn't just affect things internationally and nationally, but he's now working on a local level, David, and it's very dangerous, especially to law enforcement. The way I like to work is, and what we're doing at The Populist, is I give people enough material, completely vetted research material. There's no conjecture here, so people can look into it themselves, because I've noticed people who like news like digging into stuff, right? And so
Sure.
George Soros last year launched an initiative where in 11 different states, he began putting money into municipal and state attorneys' races. Now, this is really smart. Don't forget, George Soros, I don't like the guy, but he's a genius. Okay, he's an economic genius. And he realized, simple economics, most of these local district attorney races, people spend like $1,000. Does that, you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the old slogan, think globally and act locally. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's working at the grassroots level. That's why it's so difficult to get people to act at the local level. They only want to look at politics at the highest level, at the national level. Usually only at the presidential level do they get interested. That's
right. And Soros saw an opportunity here. And so what he did was, and again, this is verified by Wall Street Journal, Politico. This is no conjecture here, okay? He put money into 11 different races. He helped knock Sheriff Joe out of Maricopa County, for instance.
Yes. Spent a lot of money there, yeah.
The way he did it's real simple. In most of these races, he could put $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 into a race. In the case, for instance, in New Mexico, in Bernalillo County, the Republican opponent literally had to withdraw because he was being outspent so badly. He literally just said, I quit, okay?
Wow.
Now, this was very effective. And because it's happening on a state and municipal level, it sort of rolled under the radar. There were a few, like I say, Politico wrote about it, Wall Street Journal wrote about it, Daily Signal wrote about it, but there were some national stories, and I wrote about it a little bit too, because you have to remember, of course, David, George Soros was also a big funder of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I detail in that Populist story, I did a big 3-part series, because people often ask me, they'll say, what's Soros after? Right? What's his goal? And I know what his goal is. The Black Lives Matter movement, one of their goals is literally prison abolition. Okay? And that's because they're spiritual, they're not just spiritual. The grandfather of the Black Lives Matter is founded by 3 women, Patrisse Cullors, Alicia Garza, and Opal Tometi. Patrisse Cullors' mentor was a guy named Eric Mann. Eric Mann was a Weather Underground radical and associated Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorns. And what they believed in was what the Black Panther Party believed in 1966. It's in their program. They want to release every black person from prison. That's their explicit goal. Their argument is that no black person has ever received a fair trial in the United States because it's a racist country. That's their argument. So Eric Mann wrote a book about this guy, George Jackson. His girlfriend was Angela Davis. You've heard about Angela.
Oh, yeah.
Free Angela with the hair. And Angela Davis is the inspiration for Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander wrote the book, The New Jim Crow. And Angela Davis is a prison abolitionist. She's written major works on this. Michelle Alexander, there's video of her up, just Google on YouTube, Angela Davis, Michelle Alexander. And you'll find Michelle Alexander sitting next to Angela Davis saying, this is my inspiration. So what they talk about is and here's the way they sell it, David, and it appeals to libertarians, so it's interesting. They'll say mandatory minimum sentences, well, you end up with nonviolent drug offenders, and we need to ease up on nonviolent drug offenders. Now, that's an argument that I think for people like you and I is probably pretty compelling. We'd go,
yeah, as a matter of fact, I covered that yesterday. I talked about Senator Rand Paul saying, you don't know what the real Jim Crow laws are. It's the mandatory minimums, because that's what's locking up people. And we know that black people are not using drugs at a higher rate than white people are, but they're going to prison at a much higher rate. But the mandatory minimum thing is just drug prohibition, the drug war in general, is something that is very troubling. And I think that Attorney General Sessions' movement to restore this mandatory minimum stuff, I think that is really going to backfire on them politically. And I think it's going to feed this whole Black Lives Matter movement.
I've said the same thing, and I got to point out that I'm sympathetic to that argument, but I want to point out the danger here, because there is one. I could show you video of the leaders of this movement, including a former Symbionese Liberation Army. Remember the SLA, Patty Hearst?
Yeah.
Former SLA guy. They admit that they use the nonviolent drug offenders. They say, look, there's only a few 100,000 of those nonviolent drug offenders. Our actual goal is to release 11 million people from prison. By the way, 11 million people from prison is the entire prison population. I could show you a video where they admit that. So the danger is they're very smart, you see. They understand they need to get a little bit of a coalition going. And so they understand libertarians like Rand Paul, like the Koch brothers, okay, will come out and they're in favor of that. And again, I'm sympathetic to that argument. I think especially when it comes to, I agree with you. Nobody who voted for Donald Trump wanted Jeff Sessions to go after marijuana users. Nobody. Okay? That being said, I think we need to be a little careful of what the end goal is. And you can keep both of those things in mind, right? You can say...
And I think when we look at George Soros, the bigger picture, the final end game, I believe, is something like we've seen in the color revolutions that he's funded throughout Europe in terms of creating and he has to have a good cause here. And what they have done throughout Europe is basically they create revolutions, I think, based on based on economic classes. Here we have the sense of upward mobility except for racial classes. So what they try to do is they try to create and build on this racial division. That's what Bill Ayers and the rest of them have historically done to sell their communist movement when they brought it here. They brought it here based on a racial movement rather than economic classes like they did in Europe. And I think that's really where this is headed. Would you agree?
I 100% agree. And not only that, let me prove your point. We talked about this. I was in a film called Occupy en Masse with my friend Andrew Breitbart, directed by Steve Bannon. In Occupy en Masse, which is about the Occupy Wall Street movement, Anita Moncrief is one of the people in the film. She says at the end, the next step in this is going to be moving it to race. Yes. Because if you look at Occupy Wall Street, it was about class, 1% versus 99%. And it didn't really kick in.
That doesn't work in America, but race does work in America. Yeah,
exactly right, which is why the next iteration of it was Black Lives Matter, which directly connects to Occupy Wall Street, but they've changed the tactics. Now, by the way, where's Black Lives Matter moved now? What's the current state of the movement? Antifa.
Yes.
The current state, we went from Occupy Wall Street. I see a line between Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. And by the way, if you trace the line back, you go to the WTO Battle for Seattle in the 90s. And if you keep tracing it back, you get to the Weather Underground. I mean, when I say this, literally, Eric Mann is the mentor of Patrisse Cullors from Black Lives Matter. He recruited her, his word, when she was 17 and a half years old. She spent the next 12 years with him learning revolutionary organizing. Then she started Black Lives Matter. So when I say a direct line, I mean literally she learned at the feet of Eric Mann, whose hero was George Jackson, who was connected to Angela Davis directly. I mean, not just connected; they were lovers. I mean. Yeah.
If you look at Bill Ayers and you look at the fact that it was the Weather Underground that created white skin privilege, they've now shortened it to white privilege, and then he stopped bombing buildings and started educating kids in his propaganda, his racialism.
You think our information's hardcore? You think our focus is brutal? Try our nutraceuticals. Try our supplements. We've taken Brain Force and made it Brain Force Plus. Now with 20% more in the bottle and an even more hardcore formula. You owe it to yourself to get these products. They really have worked for myself, my family. They have 5-star reviews by the thousands. Secure your Brain Force Plus today at InfoWarsLife.com. Now 20% stronger. Again, InfoWarsLife.com.